So, I finally played Marvel's Spider-Man, and of course it was incredible. I truly mean that. Of course it was amazing. Not only for the obvious reason that I'd heard the game was incredible, but Spider-Man is one of those games that when you play it and experience the various gameplay mechanics, story beats, the fan service, all that sort of stuff, it seems obvious that this would meld together to be an amazing game. Not only does it seem obvious, but Insomniac makes it feel like the meshing of all these unique parts together to make a game this good was so easy. Like, we know what good superhero combat feels like, we know what good web swinging feels like, we know what Spider-Man should act and feel like to play, so when it's done well, it's sort of like, that's what I expect. But from prior examples, we know it's hard to nail a Spider-Man game quite as well as Insomniac has done here. Marvel's Spider-Man honestly just blew me away, and after finally playing the game and many others about to have that same opportunity through the game's release on PC later this week, I thought why not gush about what is easily my favourite Spider-Man game to date, but also one of the better games I've played in recent memory. Before I dive into the game though, with any type of comic book IP, I think it's important to go over the nostalgia associated with the character to help clear up where I stand as a fan and also let you in on some personal biases. For me, in terms of comic books, my knowledge of Spider-Man is very slim. Most of my knowledge and love for Spider-Man comes from the movies, in particular in regards to childhood nostalgia, the Raimi trilogy, the 1994 animated series, and Spider-Man on the PS1 plus the movie tie-in games for the PS2. For me, that's my peak Spider-Man nostalgia. Of course, I enjoyed the MCU's movies, Into the Spider-Verse was incredible, The Amazing Spider-Man was solid, the various animated shows were enjoyable, and games like Web of Shadows, Edge of Time, and Shattered Dimensions were all great, but my strongest connection to Spider-Man, his supporting cast, and iconic villains is with those childhood experiences. I still recall episodes of the show in '94, my first time watching and playing Spider-Man 1 and 2, being introduced to the likes of Spider-Man, Mary Jane, Aunt May, Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Scorpion, Shocker, I mean the list goes on. Again, I'm not too familiar with comic book arcs, I know some, but that's where my Spider-Man knowledge is at. I'm not a mega fan by any means, but I do love the character and his world. Why it took me almost 4 years to play Insomniac Spider-Man, I do not know, but hey, we're here now, so let's finally talk about Marvel's Spider-Man. First and foremost, let's get the elephant out of the room. Yes, in its simplest terms, this is Insomniac creating an Arkham game with Spider-Man. If you want a short, sharp recommendation, I would simplify my opinions and critiques into do you like Spider-Man and are you a fan of the Arkham formula? If you answered yes to both, you cannot go wrong with Marvel's Spider-Man. That's not to say this game is just a copy-paste with new skins, because I think the important distinction to be made with that statement is you feel like Spider-Man. Just like the Arkham games made you feel like the Cape Crusader, Marvel Spider-Man makes you feel like Spider-Man, and well, they're very different characters. I know it's a cliche, but it perfectly encapsulates this type of game and what they're trying to achieve. Fans know how Spider-Man should act, how he should move, how he fights. Fans know Spider-Man, so if you say, hey, this game makes you feel like Spider-Man, then that's probably the highest praise a game like this can ask for. With that quick recommendation out of the way, I am unfortunately going to be talking a bit more candidly about this game, and to do so without limits, here is your spoiler warning. I highly recommend playing Marvel Spider-Man, and doing so as blind as possible is something I strongly advise. Trust me, you won't regret it, and hey, the video will be here for you when you're all caught up. For those of you who have already played the game or don't care about spoilers, let's continue. Immediately I have to talk about the Spider-Man Peter Parker dynamic, because Insomniac absolutely nailed it here and established the altering personalities beautifully from the get-go. Right from the introduction, we get to see that Peter Parker's life is a bit of a mess. His apartment's a mess with notes and clothes scattered about, his financial situation leaves something to be desired, his technology is breaking, and he's on the verge of being evicted. All in all, Peter's life is the wreck we expect. The work and life balance is clearly leaning heavily towards Spider-Man, leaving Peter's life always catching up, and Insomniac perfectly introduced the player to Peter's character through visual cues instead of explicitly telling the player that his life sucks. Peter's life gets thrown further into disarray, but sticking with the introduction, let's talk about the change from Peter Parker to Spider-Man. Peter really comes to life once Spider-Man takes over, as he leaps out of his crappy apartment and immediately transitions into the thrills of being Spider-Man, the exhilarating speed of swinging through the city skylines, the adrenaline of fighting the city's criminals, and the satisfaction of helping the city, all whilst cracking jokes makes Spider-Man feel like he's still having fun. Peter may have been Spider-Man for some time now, but he's still having fun being under the mask despite whatever real-life dramas he has going on. It's this dynamic that Insomniac got so right from the beginning that immediately hooked me into the game as a whole. They nailed the character of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, which only grows the longer the story and game progresses, further helped by the incredible cast of characters. You have the wisecracking, engaging dialogue and battles between Spider-Man and his iconic villains like the Kingpin, Mr. Negative, the Vulture, Scorpion, Rhino, Electro, and Dr. Octopus. Spider-Man's dialogue and life seems much more put together, contrasting with Peter, who seems to always be running late, is so erratic and forgetful, always having the city and Spider-Man on his mind when talking to Aunt May or Dr. Octavius, but has clearly affected his relationship most with Mary Jane. Mary Jane and Peter have a great chemistry here and a clear connection to one another, but Peter has trouble just being Peter, always needing to help the city, and when Mary Jane does try and team up with Spider-Man, he becomes overprotective, causing that rift between the two. Miles Morales, who was a surprise for me, helps show a very kind, know what you're going through vibe to Peter's character after the death of his father that is greatly appreciated. All of these characters help create the character of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and huge props to all of the actors involved because they really do an incredible job here at portraying these iconic characters. Now, in terms of the actual story, it's a Spider-Man story. Well, maybe like a trilogy's worth of a story. You know what to expect here. A villain is running amok and Spider-Man needs to stop it. There is more to the story, but again, a lot of the story beats are what you expect. It just has like 3 movies worth. The story itself, like villains doing bad and Spider-Man saving the day, is the skeleton, but where the story takes itself to another level is again through the characters and how they're built up. I mean, take Octavius for an example, because he's the villain that I think is beautifully built up to perfectly stab Peter in the back. His descent from Octavius to Doc Ock is foreshadowed immediately, but is paced really well. He's clearly worried about his cognitive condition, he's stressing about creating that invention that will save him, and has Peter by his side the whole time. But that condition is rotting his brain, and so when he finally turns, all you can think is when you're battling him that he's fighting Spider-Man, not Peter, until he drops the bombshell that he knows he's hurting Peter. The betrayal of that moment, the hurt in Peter's voice, and the pure anger coming from Doc Ock makes that moment something I'll remember for a long time. It was brilliant because it was built up so well. Of course, Octavius knew Peter was Spider-Man. He caught him with the suit, and I'm sure out of wanting to keep Peter, thinking he had kept his secret, he lied. Doc Ock is by far the best villain in the game, hands down, but they all have their moments. Mr. Negative wants Norman Osborn dead because of a failed experiment that as a child created him and simultaneously killed his parents. Kingpin forewarned Spider-Man of the chaos his absence would cause, right from the beginning. Shocker, Vulture, Electro, Rhino, and Scorpion, despite not getting a lot of screen time, serve their villain credentials more so in the gameplay, but in a character context work just fine. It's good to see them if nothing else, which can be applied to the likes of Tombstone and the Taskmaster, not including the DLC, which I'll touch on later. The cast of characters in this world made me feel like I was experiencing the animated series in game form, and that was an amazing feeling. As alluded to, the story isn't all laughs and smiles. There are a number of serious moments that did hit home for me, like the passing of Miles' dad after spending a mission with him helping out, or the Sinister Six just beating Spider-Man to a pulp and feeling so defeated, like the next task is going to be insane. The betrayal of Doc Ock I've gone over, and ultimately the death of Aunt May. When the story wanted to get emotional or real, it got there, at least for me, and it's that struggle, that challenge in Spider-Man and Peter's life that invested me into the story. Again, it's a story that I think was executed really well, but may not be the most unique, which is completely fine by me. Now, in terms of the gameplay, I want to keep comparing this game to the Arkham series to a minimum, but the comparisons are there to be made, mainly in regards to the stealth and the combat. Whether it be enemy types, basic combinations, and generally how encounters flow, it feels like an Arkham combat system. Personally, I have no issue with that. The Arkham combat is great, it has a great flow about it, and it's satisfying to dodge and weave whilst beating up criminals. With that being said, the core of the combat is clearly very Arkham-esque, but that doesn't mean there isn't more to it, because again, you feel like Spider-Man. Spider-Man naturally has a lot more verticality in his moveset. He feels very zippy. His spider sense actually fits the character. The gadgets feel so useful in combat and unique to Spider-Man. You have attacks like a swing kick that feels right out of the animated series. Shooting your web shooters and sticking enemies to your surroundings is such an efficient way of dealing with tougher threats. The uppercuts, throwing punches and kicks, disarming enemies, it all feels very different despite the core of both experiences being very similar. I just loved how this combat feels. Mastering your combinations and tying them all together in one encounter is always satisfying. Utilizing your array of gadgets to mix up combat encounters from one to another. How the encounters grow tougher and tougher through new factions, and how they attack, how good it feels to be getting your ass beat, and to flip the script and come out on top, either through finding your rhythm, making use of your special combos, even just dodging at the right time to ensure an enemy is taking those bullets intended for you. The combat never became a chore because there was always something new you could be doing. You could always experiment with linking new combinations together, seeing what gadgets could piggyback off one another, learn what attacks work best on what enemies to prioritize first. There was just something to think about at all times, and that meant even when you're coming up against the same thug or demon or sable operative, for me at least, I was never like, alright, here we go again. Well, maybe I was towards the back end, which I'll touch on later, but mostly I was excited to see how this encounter would go compared to the last one. How could I improve my combos, or how could I make the fight look more fluent, and that was a lot of fun. It probably also helps that I think mission-wise, they break up the combat quite a lot, meaning it doesn't feel overdone, until you start smashing out some extra content like myself, which probably wasn't the smartest decision, but again, more on that later. Boss run combat, the bosses are enjoyable. They're not incredible fights in the sense of a challenge, though some can still put you in your place if you're reckless, but they're fun battles. Kingpin is a solid tutorial boss that helps teach the player dodges and counters for larger enemies. Boss fights like Shocker teach the player to be more vertically defensive. Not every fight's going to be on the ground, and then in regards to the actual fights, fighting Mr. Negative is very much flash over substance, with some nice visuals initially, and then fighting him again is much more interesting combat-wise. Battling Electro and the Vulture is a cool change-up, being entirely off the ground, and again visually amazing. Rhino and Scorpion are unfortunately a little lame, though the lead up to fighting Scorpion is amazing and a real mission highlight. The best fight easily goes to Doc Ock, who is more challenging than the rest of the main bosses, is visually amazing, and just enjoyable to beat the snot out of after his betrayal. Taskmaster is a great test of your abilities, as he knows all of your moves and will counterattack you easily if you try and spam attacks. Overall, the bosses aren't anything amazing gameplay wise, but they are still enjoyable to participate in because they're so stimulating visually. This is an area I do hope improves in Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2, which, if the DLC is anything to go by, definitely seems possible, but again, enjoyable battles against iconic villains that are memorable simply due to how flashy they are. Stealth wise, I mean, any fan of the Arkham series knows how this feels to play, and here in Spider-Man, it's still a good time. There's just something satisfying about lurking in the dark, in this case climbing on the ceilings or walls, waiting for enemies to separate and leave themselves vulnerable to getting snatched. It's that satisfying feeling you know and love with a Spidification, and it helps break up the combat nicely, and is actually used as an option rather than a requirement, which means having more of a choice in how to approach a fight, which is great. Where the stealth does change it up is with the infamous Mary Jane and eventual Miles Morales segments. This is about the only thing I remember hearing about back at release. This and something about puddles being worse? I don't know, but anyway, I'd heard these moments were mighty average, and that they are. I don't think they're terrible, but they're very simple. The path to the end is clear, the enemies are dumb, it just is a bit brainless. The highlights are by far the Rhino encounter with Miles, which is really tense and a great contrast to how Spider-Man views his villains, and the other where Mary Jane tells Spider-Man when to attack and help her progress through. These are solid moments, but outside of that, they were never a mission I looked forward to, especially contrasting this with the excitement of being Spider-Man. I mean, it was doomed to fail. They could have been a nice break, but they're just too predictable and end up being uninteresting as a result. Let's get back to Spider-Man though, because easily the best aspect about this game, my favorite thing, is simply swinging through New York. The traversal system in this game is something special. Web swinging is not an easy mechanic to master or get right, but Insomniac absolutely smashed it. Spider-Man's movement carries so much momentum. Your swings start off nice and easy, very relaxing, but the longer you go, the more speed you build, the more height you build, the more you start experimenting with flips, dashes, simply plummeting until you almost hit the ground and launch right back up, pulling yourself towards buildings, launching off to reach high speeds quickly. It's just a blast to move here, and it makes sense. No more swinging from webs connected to the clouds. If you're above the buildings or there are no buildings, no trees, then you're not swinging, but that doesn't mean you're immobile. You just need to find jumping off points and dashing to buildings that are always close by. I think the biggest showing of the traversal success is that the fast travel was almost pointless. The movement, whether you're just going for a leisurely swing through the city or if you're on a time crunch, combining techniques to maximize speed is fun. It's clear Insomniac took a lot from their work on Sunset Overdrive, because building up and maintaining speed and momentum is just a good time here, and more importantly, it helps the player stay in character when you have to consider when you can and can't utilize your web swinging. The movement in this game is seriously impressive and goes to show that open world games don't always need a fast travel system if you just make moving around the world interesting and engaging. All of these mechanics, the core to the Spider-Man experience, are excellent. Sure, I'm not crazy about the other characters who are playable, but that's a mission issue rather than a mechanic problem. Speaking of missions, are they anything special? Not particularly. But much like the bosses, that doesn't mean they're bad. They're enjoyable and have some true highlights, like again the Scorpion mission is incredible as you battle hallucinations, chasing down Shocker or Electro. Basically the lead up to boss fights and boss fights themselves are the memorable moments, as the rest of the missions do follow a loop. Going from point A to B, having the mission either focusing on stealth or combat, maybe some form of a puzzle that get a little stale after a while and repeat, that's fine because again the core gameplay is good fun, but I was interested in playing the missions for their story implications rather than expecting anything different from the gameplay side of things, which is a shame when you experience those great highlights I mentioned earlier. If you want to mix it up in an objective sense, you'll need to explore the world itself and do that yourself, as a lot of the variety does come from the various crimes, research centers, criminal bases, etc. Now all of this brings me to the open world, a genre that was once upon a time one of my favorites, and now I won't say I don't enjoy them, but it takes a very special game for me to want to experience that world in its entirety. I will acknowledge that what defines a special game is unknown to me because objective wise, Spider-Mans aren't anything special, but yet here I am unlocking the Platinum Trophy. That's right, I went after the Platinum Trophy for this game and I loved almost every second of it. There is definitely some tedium involved in that journey, and the open world objectives may not even be that unique, but they let me be Spider-Man for a little bit longer, and that's what I was after, along with going for the rewards associated with the various tasks that help unlock all the different suits. It felt worth it to go and stop a crime in progress, going and tackling each faction's numerous bases, completing the various research centers that have you do a wider range of tasks, from dealing with the pollution, Captain Planet style, to testing out drone technology with an invisibility suit, finding all of Black Cat's photo booths, landscapes to take photos of, lost pigeons needing to head home, Spider-Man's oddly large number of lost backpacks, Taskmaster's challenges that test your skill, and the game's quality side missions, including the likes of stopping Tombstone, one of my favorite underrated villains. Sure, when you go for 100%, all of this content is a lot, especially the crimes having 20 per district and repeating a lot, but when you have enough currency to upgrade your gadgets or buy a new suit, it feels so rewarding. The suits really push me to keep playing. Those mysterious hidden suits only attainable for 100%ing the world, I had to have it, and that's why despite the repetition, the tedium, and in all honesty, the lack of originality in some of the objectives, there was enough highlights and enjoyable moments in this world that kept me going to the end. Again, it's one of those things I cannot nail down, what I look for in an open world. Maybe it's a time thing. It took me just under 20 hours to 100% the main game, which felt just about right. Maybe over 20 hours is my limit for these types of open world games. I don't know, because when it came to the DLCs for Spider-Man, I love the stories and the new missions, but open world wise, I could not care less. I just wanted to see what was going on with Black Cat, Sable, and Hammerhead, and peace out. Before I get into that though, the City That Never Sleeps trilogy of DLCs is really enjoyable. I love Spider-Man and Black Cat's dynamic. Hammerhead is another example of underutilized villains in the Spider-Man realm that I love seeing go full Frankenstein super cyborg. I love the second DLC in particular for the direction they took Yuri, possibly alluding to Wraith in the future. All in all, outside of the new and rather lackluster open world objectives, I'm looking at the screwball challenges in particular, which I just could not stand as the alternate Taskmaster challenges, but overall the stories themselves and the missions within these DLCs are great. They had a great challenge for one. I mean, every enemy getting their hands on Sable technology will do that, so whilst limiting enemy variety, they do up the challenge to a really stressful level at times. The Hammerhead boss battles, whilst it's disappointing, these really are the only two boss fights in the DLC outside of Sable, are real tests of your abilities and probably the toughest fights in the game. Each DLC also feels like it has a theme or mood about it, with the first feeling very stealthy, the second feeling quite bleak, and the third feeling like this story is concluding one way or another. They go off what is happening in the story really well, and it was a touch that helps elevate the story in particular with the second part beautifully. I'm sure I missed something when not going for the open world objectives, which is a shame, but again, by this point in my playtime, despite each DLC taking me about an hour and a half each, that was enough for me. I loved the story this DLC told, what it possibly means for the future, but outside of that and in regards to the extra content, it didn't interest me even a little bit. It's just more of the same, which probably would have been fine back when these were releasing with a break in between, but it doesn't work so well back to back, at least not in my opinion. I'd recommend taking some breaks between the DLCs, maybe then it would be more enticing to stick around. Overall though, I mean, what else can I say? Marvel's Spider-Man is special. I regret that it took me so long to finally get to playing the game, especially considering I love Insomniac's games and Spider-Man, but I'm just glad I did finally play it and knock it off that pesky backlog. Insomniac absolutely knocked it out of the park. From the characters, the story, the core gameplay loop, it all just makes you feel like you're Spider-Man, which is the highest praise a game like this could ask for. If you're like myself, I urge you, if you can, obviously I cannot speak to the quality of the PC port, so check reviews for that separately, but if you can, you cannot go wrong with playing this game. It really is masterfully crafted. It is easily the best Spider-Man game ever made, the best superhero game since the Arkham series, and it may not be perfect with some repetition to its side content in particular, but as a whole, it is a game I will never forget experiencing, and that is truly special. But now, I should probably get around to Miles Morales at some point soon before Spider-Man 2 comes out. Thank you all so much for watching me gush about Spider-Man well and truly too late. I know this was a different style of video, at least script-wise it felt less critical and more like I was just shooting the shit. But I had a great time finally playing this masterpiece of a video game, and I hope you enjoyed visiting the game with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Comment below your thoughts on Marvel's Spider-Man and let me know if you want to see a Miles Morales video as well. Shout out to the channel members Infamous Sir Hellfire featuring Gagiano, Christian Vilegag and Cloud Connection for that extra level of support. I truly do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Go give my socials a follow if you fancy @MayorHairBear, and I'll catch you all in the next video.